But without further ado, I want to bring in Tanya Van Court. We go way back. I'm a business journalist. I interviewed Tanya when she first launched ISO, now known as Goalsetter, which is one of the most exciting fintech apps out there, specifically focused on kids. So when I thought about the YoHaus concept, young, old, there's no one better to really encapsulate that than Tanya, because she started this out of her own desire to help her own children try to find financial success, economic empowerment, just be able to understand how to survive and thrive in this world that many of us adults on this call still have a hard time trying to figure out our finances, right? So Tanya was ahead of the game in many ways in carving out that path for her own children. Tanya, thanks so much for joining us from Brooklyn. So it's a little bit later there. Yeah, you're so wonderful, and I'm so happy you're with us today.
Oh, ditto, Melody. I told you when you reached out and asked me, like anywhere Melody asked me to be, I'm just going to show up. So thank you for asking me.
I mean, don't say that, Tanya. You never know where I'll ask you in the future.
Well, that's okay. This is a good indicator of what you invite me to, and this is amazing already. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Tanya. So just some quick stats for people on this call. I mean, and I think, Tanya, you laid this out in one of your presentations. By the time kids are 12, they've received about $7,000 worth of toys. Still, 80% of teens don't have a savings account. Kids with savings accounts in their names are 6 times more likely to go to college and 4 times more likely to own stocks. You know, I'm a financial journalist, so of course, those are the stats that really stand out to me, but I think a lot of people on this call can resonate. Many parents, but also people who are just trying to figure out the way to navigate this world. How did you come up with this idea to create savings accounts for kids? I mean, you know, Dave was actually mentioning he watched the clip of you on Shark Tank turning down Mr. Wonderful. He was being greedy per usual. So I don't blame you there for turning that down. But tell me more about your sort of strategy as you left your illustrious career at Nickelodeon, at ESPN, trying to do a startup and one that, to be honest, the margins don't seem that great.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting because, Melody, I never wanted to start a startup. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. That wasn't something that was in my heart. And I feel like I was actually led to this path by some higher power, quite frankly. My daughter was 9 and she said, "Mommy, for my birthday, I really only want 2 things." And I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Enough money to save for an investment account and a bike." And I was like, wow. And, you know, like immediately I looked at her, and my daughter, you know, I happen to be African-American. My mom's Black, my dad's white. My daughter's also African-American. So she's this caramel colored child with these 2 puff ponytails on the side of her head, you know, this little thing saying this. And I just thought of like those cardboard cutout dolls that, you know, just multiply and multiply and multiply. Like I looked at her and I thought, oh my gosh, if I can get every kid to say that, I can change the world. And, you know, and then I thought, wow, I think if anyone can, I can. Like I had come from Nickelodeon. I had led preschool and parenting digital at Nickelodeon for 6 years. I was at Discovery Education, where I helped to launch digital textbooks into classrooms across the country. And that's all about multimodal learning. So I had all of these skills that were centered around how do you make things fun and engaging for kids and also educational. And then coupled with that, I just had a love for education from my mother. My mother was an elementary school teacher in Oakland, California. And so all of these kind of footsteps and footprints throughout my life felt like they were converging to this one moment with my daughter. And I thought, oh my gosh, I think I'm meant to do this. I think I'm meant to make sure that every kid in America, no matter what their background, understands money, understands how to save, understands what an investment account is, wants an investment account, right? And so that was just a real, you know, a clarifying moment for me in terms of what I thought the rest of my life was supposed to be committed to.
And for everyone on the call, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So feel free to shoot in a note, some words of encouragement, some questions, and actually during our conversation, I might just call on you if there is a question that is sort of in line with our conversation. So feel free to just jot them down in the chat. I mean, Tanya, that 9-year-old daughter is now 14. And I remember when we had last spoke, you said she had a dream of going to Stanford. You went to Stanford, you got your bachelor's and master's there in industrial engineering. Is that still her dream? You know, what's her trajectory been like? Not that there's pressure or anything. When you're 14, you don't need to have it figured out. But I'm curious if she's sort of stayed on that course, and if she has a savings account, how big has it ballooned to right now?
Oh my gosh. So no, she is not still on the course of wanting to go to Stanford. And that's such an interesting conversation in this time for all of us, because she literally just told me tonight, Mom, I think I'm going to go to Howard. And yeah,
Wow.
and so it's amazing to see just the change in the African American community in terms of how our young people are starting to define success, how they're starting to think about the path that they want to take, and how they believe particular paths will prepare them better than other paths that, you know, they believed were de facto paths just 5 years ago. So she wants to go to Howard. She wants to become an attorney. And so she wants to do Howard and then maybe Harvard Law School. And then she wants to work for the Innocence Project. And then she wants to be president. So that's her.
I mean, the Barack blueprint, right? I mean,
right.
You see that. So obviously a lot of it stems back to your own, you instilled that belief that she can do anything. And I think that's something that I'm just getting emotional thinking about, because so often many of us have that baggage or emotional sort of pain or trauma of not hearing that or not believing that, whether it's because you didn't see people who looked like you or because your parents didn't give you that sort of affirmation. Tell me more about, you know, you mentioned your mom was an educator. How did she create that platform for you? How did she first instill that and incubate you to become who you are today?
No, Melody, that's why I will show up wherever you tell me to go, because I just, you know, I love your questions. I think they're super thoughtful and they kind of get at the heart of who we are. And so, you know, your question about how did my mom instill that for me, it gets at the heart of who I am and how I've raised my daughter, Gabrielle. So we were raised in Oakland, California. My brothers and sisters, there are six of us. I'm the youngest of six. I told you I'm half black and half white. My brothers and sisters are all fully African American, meaning black mom, black dad. My mom is black, my dad is white. And only relevant, like nobody ever said, like, this is my half sister. You know, people said, this is my sister Tanya. And then we just waited for the reaction and, you know, kind of laughed at it. But the bottom line is that, you know, my mom just, number one, she really firmly believed in giving back to other people. And so as I've raised my daughter to think about who she wants to be and what she wants to be, the most important attribute for me was that she thinks about a life that allows her to give back in whatever way that is. And so, you know, I'm really proud that she says she wants to work for the Innocence Project, but that's okay if that changes, as long as, you know, whatever path she chooses has some element where she's helping other people. And so I think that's the first thing that I got from my mom. I remember that we lived in East Oakland, California, and there was a little girl across the street. Her name was Maya. And I was very young. I was 5 years old, and Maya's house burned down. And Maya and her mom came to spend the night with us because their house had burned down. And my mom was giving Maya one of my favorite nightgowns, and I'm a 5-year-old. And I'm like, okay, I know she needs a nightgown, but seriously, like my favorite nightgown? Like,
Yeah.
my favorite nightgown. So I, like, you know, am crying or upset or whatever. And I remember my mom saying, Tanya, you know, you have 6 nightgowns here. You have 6. And her house just burned down and she has nothing. And you should be really happy that you have an opportunity to give her this. That should make you feel good. And I remember that so distinctly, Melody, because my mom actually died when I was 6 of a brain aneurysm. And so I have very few memories about my mother. And so those memories stick, right? Those memories are the ones that stick. And so I always remember, no matter how little I think I may have, I've certainly got something more than someone else. And so I try to raise my kids with that. I also try to raise my kids with just, you know, pride in education. I remember, you know, I skipped kindergarten, and I always tell my daughter, you see how smart I am? I skipped kindergarten. And she's like, Mom, it just meant you could color better than everyone.
It's not true, right? I mean, it has some logic there.
Not true. But, you know, I do remember being in preschool, and I remember one of the teachers asking who could count by tens. And I remember going up to the front of my little preschool classroom, and like, I was so proud in that moment. And I remember like 10, 20, 30, 40, and it just felt like I was on fire and on top of the world. And I remember that moment because as I fast forward to my adulthood, what I thought about that moment was, if we teach kids early, if we teach them to have knowledge so that when they show up in the classroom in a formal setting where they might be discounted because of the color of their skin, or they might be discounted for some other reason, but they have knowledge, they're going to feel great about that knowledge that they have. And they're going to want to learn more because they're going to get affirmation and approval for knowing something and for being educated. And so that's always been my philosophy around, if you teach kids early, then what you actually create is kids who are inspired and voracious because they get social approval from being smart or from being educated, right? And so that feeds into itself. So I think that's the other thing that, you know, I have always believed about my own children. I've always taught them very early. So it may seem precocious that Gabrielle was this 9-year-old saying that she wanted an investment account. But for me, I needed her to know as much as she could know early so that when she walked out into the world, she felt confident that she was smart and she wanted more of that.
Yeah. I mean, Tanya, your positive energy is radiant, right? And I think everyone on this call can feel that. It's very palpable, even though we're all connected virtually. But one of the themes that we've talked about during our YoHaus conversations with leaders across industries is that pain is a powerful vessel. It's a vehicle to actually do good in this world. And so often we find that to be the underlying sort of common denominator across a lot of people's journeys. And you mentioning your mom passing when you were 6 years old, you had another tragedy that happened later in life a couple of years ago. You lost a child, and I think his name was Seneca. And so now you had 4 kids, now you have 3 children. Can you tell me more about how that happened? Was it because of natural causes? And how did you overcome that sort of the most devastating tragedy that anyone can think of?
Yeah, so, you know, I had Gabrielle, and my pregnancy with Gabrielle was, you know, not flawless by any means. You know, there were a couple of red flags during the pregnancy, but they you know, all just kind of, they resolved themselves and they were fine. And when I had Gabrielle, I remember on her 3rd day of life, I was trying to nurse and I was having problems, and the lactation consultant came over. And when the lactation consultant came over, she was talking to me, and I was sitting there holding Gabrielle, and I kissed her on her forehead and she smiled. And I kissed her on her nose and she smiled. And then I kissed her on her lips and she smiled. And the lactation consultant said, I'm going to be honest with you. I've never seen a baby with a social smile this early. And that is a social smile because she responded every time you did something. And she said, this child is special and is brilliant. And so, you know, that was Gabrielle. And Gabrielle just, you know, shot out of the gates like that in every way. One of my good friends always says, Tanya, we all know you microwaved Gabrielle. The rest of us had babies that were buns in the oven. You had a bun in the microwave. So, so, you know, that experience with Gabrielle was awesome. And 2.5 years later, I got pregnant with Seneca. And I got pregnant very quickly, got pregnant in a month. And that was a blessing because so many women have trouble getting pregnant and don't talk about it. And so, you know, I was very blessed for that. But shortly into the pregnancy, you know, the doctors started to tell me that they thought something might be wrong. And the worst part about it, though, is that half of the doctors said that something might be wrong. And the other half of the doctors said, your baby's going to be perfectly fine. Don't listen to them. And so, you know, when you're a mom trying to just figure out everything about your pregnancy and what to expect and how to prepare yourself, and, you know, half of your mind is over here, like my child is going to be very sick, and half of your mind is over here, like my child is going to be fine. It literally makes you schizophrenic. I mean, I would show up to doctor's appointments and, you know, literally one day a doctor would say, we need to hurry up and induce you. The safest place for this baby to be is out of the womb. The next day I'd show up because, you know, I was at one point checked into the hospital early. So they'd come by my room the next day and say, oh, the safest place for this baby is inside of you. I'm so glad the baby hasn't come yet. And I was like, oh my gosh, you've got to be kidding me. So Seneca ended up, he was born about 6 weeks early, and he was very fragile and had a lot of problems. And so those doctors who told me that my child would have a severe syndrome were really right. And, you know, there were a couple of things that forced me to face in my life. The first thing that it forced me to face, I talked to a counselor, you know, a therapist afterwards. And she said, I bet you thought that the worst thing that would ever happen to you is that you would lose your mother. And you thought that the rest of the bad things in life would be doled out for other people. And I said, wow, you are absolutely right. I mean, you know, just think about my life prior to then, right? Like, I lost my mother. My aunt adopted all of us. She was amazing and wonderful as a surrogate mother. You know, I was a star student. I had friends. I went to Stanford. I majored in engineering. I got, you know, almost a full scholarship for my master's program. I thought, great, this is what God has paid for me because he took so much. So he's giving me the easy path in life. And then when Seneca was born, and Seneca was so sick, and 3 months later, Seneca had heart surgery and didn't make it out of his heart surgery, I thought, oh my God, I can't believe that this could happen to me too. And so it really made me understand that, you know, there is no fairness or justice or equal measure of sadness that any one of us can claim for life or can dole out to other people. It's, you get what you get, and you know, you have to hopefully have the tools and the support system around you to deal with it as best you can, because you know, we may all get what we think is an unjust measure, but it's just our measure. It's what we get. The second thing that, oh, I'm sorry, the second thing that I had to really face was this notion of my own perfection. And so, you know, I really believe that God gave me a child who was so clearly imperfect to help me to understand that I too was imperfect, and it was okay. You know, it was okay for me to cry and say, why me? Which, you know, now I look back on and go, oh my gosh, Tanya, you know, why were you worried about you? But it's a human emotion, and it was okay for me to feel that way in the moment. It was okay for me to feel like I was less than a perfect mother, because none of us is. And so that caused me to change. It caused me to change, and probably, quite frankly, is the only reason I could be on this path that I'm on now, because we all know that entrepreneurship is fraught with feeling imperfect. And I wouldn't have that courage had I not developed that courage through Seneca being here and through Seneca teaching me that.
Wow, Tanya. First of all, thank you so much for opening up your heart to all of us. Basically, everyone except me, you're meeting for the first time. So I know that's no easy task. And I know we all respect and value the way that you shared that story with such openness and vulnerability. And I do feel as though you have a shell of empathy and a shell of you're not afraid to fail, because you feel as though perhaps, as your therapist said, you know, the first time was maybe nothing can really top, you know, your mother passing away, and then you had a sick child and your child passing away. And now you're like, you know what? I can conquer the world. Every day is a blessing in some ways. And I only discovered actually today that you are a Christian as well. Did you lean on your faith during that time? Did you fall away from God during that period? How did you reconcile your own emotions? And you mentioned your anger that you felt during that time.
Yeah, no, I didn't fall away from God. I remember actually, you know, I would go to church during that time, and I would sit in the pews and sob. And I would look around and think to myself, nobody else is sobbing. These people have normal problems. I wish I just had normal problems. These problems I'm having right now, these are abnormal. God help me, because, you know, I need help right now. And so, you know, for me, it was really clear that that moment of vulnerability, I needed to stand on shoulders that were stronger than mine, because I couldn't make it by myself. So I definitely leaned into my faith, and more than that, like I leaned into, you know, I always, it's funny, but in those moments where people say, well, how do you know God exists? You haven't seen God. And I say, oh, yes, I have. And they're like, wait, what do you mean? And I'm like, I see God every day through the people who are around me and the way that God appears through those people. And so, you know, when I went to church and the church leaders and the prayer leaders would stand around and I could go up to them and hold their hands and they would pray with me for, you know, 5 minutes or, you know, longer than they prayed with everyone else because they could tell that I needed it, right? And then I was calm. And then I felt serene. And then I felt comfort. And then I felt arms around me, even though there were no physical arms around me. I saw God in those moments, and I needed those moments in order to get me through the next week until I could make it to the next Sunday. So, you know, so we were raised, and I was raised, my aunt, you know, we went to church every Sunday. And so even at times, because I was an engineer, I think every engineer out there is like, no, God doesn't exist. There's no equation that shows me that God exists. So I definitely went through that time. But, you know, I've had enough moments in my life where I'm like, oh, okay, yep, I see you. I hear you. I feel you.
Yeah, I love that. I think you texted me earlier, you know, when you were too lazy in high school to get up early for church, you told her that you were exploring your religion, and she said, that's fine. Church teaches you good lessons about how to live life, no matter what religion you decide. So get up and get dressed. And I feel like that's so relevant to a lot of people who grew up in Christian households, I would say, where it's just like, you know, it's another habit, it's another practice. And regardless of how much you actually soak in, that actual, you know, coming together, and especially during this time of COVID, or sitting on your couch and tuning in Dave, that really pays off dividends sometimes. You know, just thinking about the justice piece, you mentioned that, especially when Seneca passed away, you questioned order, justice, what's fair in this world. During this period of Black Lives Matter, as a Black female entrepreneur, you talk about a lot of the barriers that you've already had to overcome. But during this time of social unrest and racial injustice that's come to light again and again, how are you dealing with a lot of those conversations? Do you remain optimistic? Obviously, Goalsetter, you have this really fascinating campaign that you launched on Juneteenth, where you're trying to get 1 million Black youth to sign up for savings accounts, and you've teamed up with TikTokers, YouTubers, billionaires to try to get this initiative going. But just personally, how do you feel in this moment, in this movement?
Yeah. So, you know, I personally feel, I personally feel so conflicted. There are parts of me that are ashamed, right? So my daughter woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning one night and called me on my phone. I'm literally, you know, like 20 feet away from her bedroom. And so she called me. So your phone rings in the middle of the night and you're a mom, even though all your kids are home, you're still worried. Yeah, I'm like, what? What's going on? And I had cause to be, because she calls and she's crying and sobbing and hyperventilating. And I'm like, Gabrielle, what's wrong? I'm coming to your room. Give me a second. I run to her room. And she says, Mommy, how have Black people lived this way for so long? And so when I say I feel ashamed, right, it's, you know, you feel this 15-year-old looking at you with judgment, like, why didn't you guys do more? How have you collectively, your generation, how did you guys let it get to this place? And why did you accept it? And so, you know, there is that. I feel ashamed. I feel like, wow, we let them down, right? We got complacent with, you know, oh, wow, there's one Black person in the executive suite at every corporation in America. And so, you know, okay, well, that's better than the none that were there 15 years ago. And so I feel that. I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful because, you know, I see in some pockets real change being made. I will say I don't feel hopeful necessarily in the VC community. I'm not sure that I have really seen more Black companies getting checks. I'm not sure that there's real change and real leadership to demonstrate change in that community. I don't know that I've seen that there. So that makes me sad, because it's important. It's important for that community to get it and to do things that demonstrate that this is more than a moment for them, a moment of, please just don't put me in the paper. I don't want to be featured on Melody's show. Let me write my check so I can avoid that, right? We don't want it to be that moment. We want it to be long-standing and authentic. And so, so I feel hopeful in some ways because I do see real change being made in some sectors. I mean, I had a call with a major bank today, and they just promoted one of their African-American executives to take over an initiative and invest $1 billion in Black communities. And, that's real. You put a B behind the number, that's real, right? Those other organizations that are like, we're going to give $1 million this year. I'm like, seriously? Do you understand the depth of 450 years of inequity and inequality and racism and oppression and subprime lending and redlining and denial of opportunities to have a job, denial of opportunities to walk down the street, denial of opportunities to, live in a home that you wanted to buy. I mean, these are basic fundamental rights that so many people take for granted that Black people have actually taken for granted that we wouldn't get, right? Like, oh yeah, I didn't expect to get that because ... So I'm hopeful in some ways, I'm disappointed in some ways, I'm ashamed in some ways. And so it is a complex set of emotions, Melody. It's complicated, and it's exhausting. It's exhausting. But at the end of the day, look, it's worth it, right? I mean, it's worth it. We have never had this moment before in history. We've never had this time, or maybe we had this time in the 60s where people were standing arm to arm and saying, this is not okay and change needs to happen. And so this is our time, and we have an opportunity, right? I'm much happy to be here where we are today than where we were a year ago. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to be, I'm going to be glass half full on this one. I'm going to be glass half full because I think we got a shot.
And I think it's been really amazing to see the various tributes for John Lewis, because that seems to be the echoing sentiment, right? Where everyone's saying he probably was not happy with how he left the world, even though he's made so much progress and he's been at the helm of really making strides over the last 4 decades. However, if you think about it, this is not the end all be all, right? This is not the final destination. We're still very much in the early innings of the journey. We have some amazing commentary from our group, Inez saying, ashamed and hopeful and sad, wanting things to be longstanding and authentic. Stephanie agrees, I feel that guilt too. Why did we get so complacent? And kind of on that point, Tanya, I don't want to press too much on this because I don't want to be cynical, but being a journalist, I think unfortunately that's sort of the part of the DNA. Jason Lee, my fiance, is on this call. He hates that about me sometimes. And he's like, can you just be glass half full? Can you have rose-colored glasses, please, for a moment? And I try. But when you think about even the purpose of Goalsetter, the purpose of, higher education in many ways, which is sort of the saving component of Goalsetter, is the aim that people can save money to pay for tuition, to be able to better their lives, especially for BIPOC communities. But there is some research out there that there is a myth of closing this racial wealth gap through education, because even Black folks who do go to great institutions, their median pay is devastatingly lower than white people, even Asian people. And I will acknowledge the privilege of sort of being able to liaise as a person of color, but who has been at an advantage in many ways. My dad immigrated here as a professional, right? So when you think about those sorts of complications, how do you work through those sorts of hard, complex issues where you say, is this enough just because you go to a good school? Does that really empower you? Does that give you the same opportunities as these kids who are legacy kids who already have this existing network because their dad is a VP at Morgan Stanley? Just talk me through that a little bit.
Yeah. Look, I'll tell you, no, it's not enough. It's absolutely not enough. And that's been the great trick of America, quite frankly, right? America said to Black people, look, all you got to do is play by the rules. All you have to do is get a good education, but we're going to underfund your schools. All you have to do is go to a great college, but we're going to make sure that you have so much debt coming out of that great college that, you know, you are never really able to get ahead. If you look at the amount of black debt versus white debt in this country, white people actually have more debt than black people, but black people have more high interest debt. They have more credit card loans and they have more school loans, right? All you have to do is graduate from that great college and get a master's degree and then go and get a great career and you'll be fine. Oh, but you're going to get paid less than your white counterparts. And by the way, because your entire community has been oppressed for so long, you're going to have to use more of your paycheck to support extended family members. And you're going to, and you know, not being rich comes with a tax in and of itself. Being poor comes with a tax in and of itself. So you're always going to have to pay more for everything. Being black comes with a tax, right? There is a black tax. You are going to have to pay more for your car loan, for your mortgage, because when you walk in to do that deal and you are black, somebody on the other end of the table, this is fact-based too, is going to give you a higher interest rate, right? So America has had this great trick of just follow this path and you will be able to live the exact same life as your counterpart. And yet there are studies that tell us that African-American men who have college degrees will fall into poverty more quickly than white men who have high school degrees, right? Why is that? It's because of all of the systemic underlying oppression, racism, lack of opportunity, lack of equality. So we know how complicated it is. No, it's not enough, but it's something, right? We got to go back to, but it's something, right? So when Tanya can go to Stanford and try to start a business, and I don't have, you know, everyone will tell you, as you are an entrepreneur, you got to go do a friends and family round. You got to go do a friends and family round, right? I was the one who my friends and family were coming to if they ever needed any money. So now I quit my job. I don't have a salary anymore. And I'm trying to start a business. Where's that friends and family round going to come from, right? I got to write myself a check and another check and another check. But for me, I went to a Stanford Black Alumni Association conference. I stood up at the Stanford Black Alumni Association conference and said, hey, I'm starting a business. Anybody want to invest, please come see me afterwards, right? So the fact that there weren't that many black people at Stanford, right? Not good enough, but at least there were some. And there were some who had, you know, careers where they made enough money, eked out enough money where they could write me a $25,000 check to support my startup. And that is something, because then if I succeed and, this startup gets sold, I'm going to have some more money that I can reinvest in the Black community and in other Black startups. And that is something, right? And so, no, none of it is enough. All of it has to happen. And I was telling somebody just the other day, Melody, everyone thinks that the Underground Railroad ceased to exist. The Underground Railroad didn't cease to exist, right? As Black people, we still have to help each other. I have to be able to call someone who's in a position of power at a major bank to support our initiative that we're launching, right? A Black person who's in a position of power at that major bank to help with this initiative. I have to be able to call an investor who happens to be Black and can introduce me to other people and vouch for me. That's the only way this is going to get done, because there are still too many biases in our society. And so not one component of it is enough. We need all of it, and we need everyone's help. It has to be the Underground Railroad, but we all remember, right, who led the Underground Railroad and who supported the Underground Railroad. There were allies there who were supporting the Underground Railroad. So don't think it was just Black people helping each other. So if you're on this call and you're an ally, help with that Underground Railroad, because it's the only way that we are all going to get north and get free.
Yes, and especially because we only have this one call, we don't have 3 different time zones. Just seeing this diaspora of faces, right? We have people from Brazil, we have people all across America, we have people in Asia. To your point, allyship is not based on color. Allyship is based on empathy, is based on understanding, is based on just saying, I'm here for you, I want to support you in any way that I can. And actually, for those of you on the call, Jamel Hill, the former ESPN correspondent, who's now a writer at The Atlantic, she has this great podcast, and she interviewed Gabrielle Union. And Gabrielle went in on how to be an ally for the Asian American community that's faced a lot of xenophobia and discrimination and blatant racism during this period of coronavirus. And I think that's just a perfect example of using your platform in a powerful way to support other people, just because we need to have solidarity with one another. If not, there's no way to achieve any sort of real progress or meaningful structural change. I wanted to
have to tell you a funny story. My daughter, as you said, is 14, right? And all of her friends think she's gay, and she's not gay, but she is so down with the LGBTQ movement
yes.
that all of her friends are like, oh, did you know Gabrielle was gay? Gabrielle, do you like her? And she's like, no, I'm not gay. But like, I mean, we have to be down for anyone who is oppressed. I mean, we have to all be there for each other, because when they move from you, they're going to move to you. And when they move from you, they're going to move to you. And so we've got to be there flanking each other. It's the only way to live life.
That's so powerful. I, of course, could hog so much more of your time, but we have this flurry of questions coming from our group. Caitlin Chung, I actually would love if individuals could unmute themselves and ask the questions that they have asked in the chat. Caitlin, if you are there, are you there? It's okay. I see your video is not on, but if you could unmute yourself and potentially ask your question to Tanya, I would love that.
I'm here. I'm here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi. I know earlier on you guys were talking about how you were instilling education in your daughter very early on, and then you guys kind of furthered on into racism and how you've grown up. And I was just kind of linking the two together, and I was wondering if, you know, racial prejudice and racism from others kind of was a factor to you instilling that type of intellect and knowledge into your daughter and your other children.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caitlin, for asking that question. By the way, you're awesome. Look at you as a high school student and being a part of this amazing community. So proud of you. That's awesome. So, you know, my experience is so interesting in terms of racism because, you know, just as you just said, Melody, that you have to acknowledge your privilege, I have to acknowledge the privilege that people don't know what I am, right? There are often times where people think I'm Latino, there are Latina, there are times when people think I'm Jewish, there are times when people just think I'm white. And you know, every Black person I know says, but the minute you open your mouth, everybody knows what you but you know, I don't necessarily think that's the case for non-Black people, right? They're not sure what I am. And so I usually self-identify very early just because it's who I am. I would never be able to pass. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror because I was raised as an African-American woman alongside a whole African-American family. But in any event, so my experience has been, I have seen racism up close and personal because people say to me the stupidest things if they don't know what I am, right? And that's been from the time, Caitlin, that I was your age. I remember, you know, working at an internship in high school, and I went outside, and there was a woman standing outside, and it was a corporate office. And I said, excuse me, do you know where I could get a muffin? You know, I was new to this area of town. And she said, well, yeah, there's a place around the corner this way, but there's always a group of Black people hanging around outside. So I would go to this place instead over here. And I said, I think I'm gonna go ahead and venture to the place that has the group of Black people outside because I'm Black and my mother's Black. And so I'm not usually afraid of a group of Black people. And, you know, so those moments, by the way, I was in a conversation talking about having to be allies, right? I was in a conversation with a C-suite executive at a major bank in America. And we were talking about Goalsetter and financial literacy and saving and closing the wealth gap. And he said, well, isn't there only a wealth gap in this country? There's not really a Black-white wealth gap, right? There's only a wealth gap because of Silicon Valley and all of the Asians and Indians in Silicon Valley who are making all the money there. And wait for it, their brains work differently anyway. My brain could never work like that. C-suite executive still occupies this chair today. I'm not done. So then we started talking about the home ownership gap. And by the way, of course I responded, guys. Don't think I didn't respond. But, and then we start talking about the home ownership gap and between Black and white Americans. And he says, well, isn't there only a difference in home ownership because most Black people are single moms with no men in the house, and so they're not trying to buy homes. So, when you ask me, is that why I'm preparing my children to be educated? Absolutely. I'm preparing them to be educated because being educated gives them the best chance of navigating this America. Being educated gives them the best chance of understanding when they hear that kind of nonsense, what the facts are, and being able to correct people and to maintain their dignity. Because if you're not educated, you shirk and you feel small and you allow that person's lack of education to dictate your self-perception. But if you're educated, they can't do that to you, right? And so, yes, that's exactly why I want to make sure my children are educated. And it's funny because my daughter is now on the debate team at her high school, Brooklyn Tech, and you can't tell her anything. I mean, I wish she were in the room with me when I was sitting with that C-suite executive because, he would have been just read up and down with that one in the room. And so, yes, absolutely. They've got to be educated so they know how to navigate. They have to be educated so they know how to build wealth in a society that's going to keep them from doing so at every turn, right? They have to be educated so they can maintain their self-respect in a society that wants to make them feel less than. They have to be educated for all of those reasons. I remember my aunt, when we were growing up, she used to make us read African-American history cards in the summer and write reports on these great African-American historical figures, because she believed that if we knew our history, we would know our greatness. And she was absolutely right? Like if yes, we are amazing and brilliant as a people. If yes, Melody, you are amazing and brilliant as a people, right? Then all of this nonsense that comes our way, we can dismiss as that's your issue and your problem. And I'm not going to let your circle encroach on my circle. I'm going to push all that away.
Yes, I love that, Tanya. And everyone is saying, please never be done. Because I think you mentioned that you're not done yet. Stephanie Walton, a key member of our YoHaus community, has been commenting, and she had a question earlier on. Stephanie, if you want to unmute and ask your question to Tanya.
Hi there. I just want to sit here and listen to you all night. My husband came in from outside. He's like, she's dropping so many truth bombs. I think you answered my question though, because my question was about connecting financial independence or finance to racism. Like, is having financial freedom or economic security the key to ending racism? Thank you.
Yes, and yes, and yes. Okay, so, we launched this movement to get 1 million Black kids saving on Juneteenth. And why on Juneteenth? Because Juneteenth in 1865 is when the African-American slaves in Galveston, Texas, were told that they were free, 2.5 years late. So what does Juneteenth tell us? Juneteenth tells us that the cavalry is not coming for you. And if the cavalry comes, they're going to be there 2.5 years late. And so you have got to figure out, we called our movement Saving Ourselves, because we have to figure out how to become self-sufficient, how to become financially independent, how to save ourselves. It broke my heart when, we were leading up to Juneteenth this year, and I thought about, as a mother, those mothers walking off of plantations with children in their arms and saying, hallelujah, we're free, but then having no way to feed their children, having no money to go and, where were they going? They couldn't go and get a hotel room at the Hilton like, whoa, I'm free. Now I'm going to, go hang out by the pool. That wasn't happening on Juneteenth, 1865. And so, you have these mothers who are told that they're free, but they can't feed their kids. That's not freedom. No one of us would characterize that as freedom. And so now you fast forward 200 years, 1865 until, where we are today. And Black people still aren't free. Black mothers still can't feed their children. Black mothers still go to hospitals and have a higher mortality rate than any other women in the country. I mean, all of those things are absolutely associated. Black children still can't get educated in decent schools. All of those things are surrounded by economic freedom. And so, yes, we need economic freedom and financial freedom in order to have power, because when you have power, you have influence, and you have influence over your schools and your neighborhoods and your hospitals and everything else that matters in terms of living a free life. So yeah, financial freedom is the key to it. And the reason I focus on kids is because, by 2053, African Americans are projected to have a negative net worth. Latinos are projected to have a negative net worth in 2073. And the truth of the matter is, I don't think I can change those statistics if I focus on 40-year-olds and 50-year-olds and say, look, we're going to have to try to figure out how to reverse that curse. But I do think I can change those statistics if I focus on every kid in America. And so if we got a savings account today into the hands of every Black kid in America who was between 0 and 18, then by 2053, they would be between 33 years old and 51 years old. And guess what? They would have been, as Melody said earlier, 6 times more likely to have gone to college and 4 times more likely to own stocks by the time they're 25 years old. And with our app, we actually teach kids about financial literacy through memes and GIFs from social media influencers, hip hop personalities, television stars, YouTube personalities, from all of these personalities and language that they can relate to. And so not only are these kids by 2053 who are using our app, not only are they going to be the next generation of savers and investors and understand how to build wealth, they're also going to be financially fluent. And so, there's a 12-year-old here in Brooklyn. Her name is Sadeh. She was interviewed by ABC News a couple of weeks ago for this initiative. And they said, Sadeh, what do you love most about Goalsetter? And she said, I love that it teaches me things about money that I never knew I should know. I thought money was about saving some and spending some, but now I know it's about frugality and compound interest and the rule of 72. Now I want you to imagine for a second that every Black kid out there by 2053 knows about frugality and the rule of 72 and compound interest. Now we're living in a different world. Now we're not spending all of our money, $1 trillion every year in the consumerist society that is taking that money and becoming wealthy while we are headed towards a negative net worth. Now we're acting differently because if you know better, you do better. So that's what we're trying to do.
Tanya, I know it's actually, the hour is up, but there is a question from William, also part of the YoHaus community, that I feel like we need to ask. He asks, William, I don't know if you want to ask it directly, actually, before I pass over the mic to Dave.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this time. It has been amazing. The question that I have is, time and time again, every time this accumulation of wealth collectively, not individually, but collectively has tried to be built, it's been met violently with force. And it makes me think of the Tulsa massacre that happened. And so how do we preemptively plan and build strategically? I think a part of it is that Underground Railroad that you talked about, but how do we do this in a way so that way it's impactful, it's meaningful, we do create that net, but at the same time, it doesn't evoke that violent response that we're constantly running into?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I think the only answer is literally, as you said, I'm sorry, guys, give me 1 second. Hi. Can you say hi to my friends?
Hi.
Can you tell what your name is?
Pickle.
His name is not Pickle, you guys. I did not name that baby Pickle. Can you spell your name? Yeah. See? Okay. M. Oh, get out of here. Bye. Go ask your sister to give you a popsicle. Okay? And mommy will be right there. Go tell Sissy to give you a popsicle. So, William, I'm sorry.
I got to apologize.
So community wealth, right? Community wealth. And how do we do that? Look, I think that there are a few important components of that, right? And so I'm going to draw upon some really smart people who have been commenting on this as of late. The first smart person I'm going to draw upon is Kimberly Jones, right? And so if any of you did not see the Kimberly Jones clip, it's amazing. You got to look it up. If somebody posted in the chat window, I think it's well worth it for all of us to see. But Kimberly Jones essentially said, look, we've been playing Monopoly for 400 years. For the first 400 years, you didn't even let us roll. For the next 50, so we couldn't accumulate any wealth because you were just going around and around and around the Monopoly board, taking all the wealth. And after that 400 years, for the next 50 years, anything that we rolled, so to your good point, right, this is Tulsa, anything that we rolled and anything that we built, you took from us. And so now we're in a position where the gap is a chasm, and the only way we're going to close it is if you share. You've got to share something that you have amassed, right? And so, look, that's the first way. And that's part of the answer, which is why Robert Smith now, so again, invoking second brilliant Black person, has been talking about this 2% initiative where, you know, he has indicated that major banks and financial organizations and corporations need to give 2% back into the Black community. And I'm not, you know, precise around the details, so I don't want to, you know, delve too deeply into that. But the bottom line is, again, that is an indicator of how you share, right? These corporations that have built so much off of the backs of the Black community. So that's the first thing. Look, because the truth of the matter is the gap is this big, guys. Like, we can't make this up on our own when we're headed towards a negative net worth and we've got this much and other folks have this much. But they have this much, right? Because of all of the systemic and infrastructure that has given them that much and given us this level. So number one has to be, there has to be some sharing. But the second one is we have to start having systems in place that allow for building of capital, right? That allow for us to build wealth. If no one is investing in Tanya Van Court, right? Now, let me tell you, y'all, my competitors have raised $70 million over the past 5 years, right? Melody told you that we met 5 years ago, $70 million. I've raised 2.5. If people aren't investing in the Tanya Van Courts of the world, then I can't build a business. We can't build wealth as a community. And the majority of the people who have invested in me, quite frankly, have been Black people, brown people, and women. And so those are the folks who have given me a shot. And so that's what we have to do, right? We have to get investment. There has to be investment in Black businesses. We have to get positions of power. There has to be hiring and promotion of Black executives, because those are the only things that move America. I have a friend who was, you know, the highest ranking Afro-Latino at Nike and at Apple. And he left and he told me, Tanya, I thought that I was going to do all of these amazing projects and I was just going to work with people that I like and work on things that I love. And I wasn't going to have to deal with the corporate America bullshit anymore. And he said, and then I realized that corporate America runs everything in America. So if we don't have people in positions of power in corporate leadership where they can make decisions that are influencing how corporations invest in Black communities, how they treat Black consumers, right? Not giving subprime loans, et cetera, right? We've seen that time and time and time again. If we don't have the right people sitting in those seats, if we don't have checks being written to Black businesses, if we don't have Black banks that have the capability of supporting communities in the ways that they need to be supported, then we're never going to be able to catch up. So those are the things I would say, right? We need access to capital, we need positions of power, and we need for folks to share.
Tanya, you are just a faucet of blessings. And I feel like, yeah, we didn't even prep this call. I literally just sent her a cold email, sent her a couple texts, and here she is with this abundant amount of wisdom, total inspiration.